My name is Kriz, and we'll jump right into it. Welcome. When I made that post on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago about, hey, anyone wants to learn futures thinking, come, I expected 10 of my closest friends to come. And now I have, 100 and something people signed up. I don't know if everyone's going to show up, but this is wonderful. This is the level of interest on futures thinking that is happening right now that I wish had happened long ago, but I'll take it. I'll take it. And I'm very happy to be seeing you all right now. So let's get started. We have an hour. And what I want to do for this hour is to basically walk you through what I've learned in my journey in trying to practice, learn about futures thinking, and in trying to get my friends in the social change sphere, try to see if it works for them and how it can make their work better, meaning have more impact. I will start by introducing myself because I think it will give context for what you're going to hear from me about my perspective on futures thinking. And what is that? What is that context? So I'm from the Philippines. Hello, Filipino friends in the call. I know there are quite a few. I'm trained as a human rights lawyer, and I started as an activist in a human rights NGO in the Philippines, doing community organizing. And I thought that's what I was gonna do for the rest of my life. I was in love with it, but my curiosity got me to do the same work, but in other parts of the world. And then at some point, as I imagine many of you have gone through in your career in this area, I went through a crisis of faith about whether my work was making an impact. And along with that crisis, I found apparently constructive channels about that crisis. I started picking up new tools, perspectives to make sense of my crisis and my questioning. And that's when I ended up finding out that I wasn't as good as being the frontline activist as I was to being behind the scenes supporting the activists. That's when I started picking up things like design thinking, futures thinking. Fast forward when I was working in Colombia, we started a lab there, parallel to me working in an NGO in Colombia called De Justicia. That was like this Disneyland for activists who just wanted to think truly without boxes, using design thinking. We were coming up with crazy, untested ideas on how to make human rights win hearts and minds of people again. And so I was running the lab and I was running workshops using design thinking, and people were coming up with these amazing ideas. But being the constantly questioning person that I started asking again, well, these organizations I'm working with are coming from some of the most difficult contexts you can possibly imagine. The whole closing civil society space, this was around 2014, 2015 was already a thing. They're from Russia, Hungary, Turkey, India, Burma, Venezuela. Very difficult contexts where I realized that with the creative ideas we were coming up with, if, say, Erdogan came up with a new policy or non-policy the next day, this awesome idea will be useless the next day, and they'll have to recreate the same wheel of coming up with ideas again. So while I found something deeply amazing and meaningful with our design thinking processes, I found that we were recreating the same, let's constantly produce things and answer in contingency mode to the situation around us. That was when I found futures thinking. Really by accident, but I fell in love with it. And since then, I've tried, with the consent of willing guinea pigs, to test and try different ways of doing futures thinking. And this webinar, if you can call it like the summary of all my lessons, which people might agree with, disagree with, but this is my humble sharing of what I've learned in the last several years of trying to do this and practice this. So what I'm going to do is use slides that my very talented Colombian graphic designer, Ale, has produced for me, but I'm trying to move you all, but I can't. How do I do that? There. There. You can see my slides? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. If you're able to turn on your video, because I'm not looking at myself nor my sites, I'm scrolling through your faces. So welcome to How to Do Foresight in Change Making. So what do we even mean by foresight? So I will be using foresight and futures thinking interchangeably here. When people, when I first started talking about futures thinking, like 2017 to colleagues in the field, their first question was, futures thinking, but we can't even predict the future. What's the point of all of this? But futures thinking is actually not about predicting the future. Futures thinking is about thinking in a very systematic and disciplined way about different futures, and then working backwards from there so that we can be ready regardless of what future comes to pass. So it's not a bet everything in one scenario approach, but let's game all possible scenarios. And then we don't care whichever one comes to pass or becomes real, or none of them does, but we try to mine them for all the important, provocative, strategic questions that they make us confront and reflect on. That is the essence of futures thinking or foresight for me. So it ruined one word for me in the English language. Instead of saying the future, now I say the futures. It's awkward, but that is what futures thinking is about. It's not one, the future, but a number of futures. I constantly get asked, so what's your approach to futures thinking? You know, we like to find out where people come from methodologically. Well, my work wife, Ishtar, who sits here with me in South Africa, proudly calls us the methodological sluts. We are promiscuous. I am promiscuous in methods. That's how my brain works, and that's how I find my work being effective in working with organizations. And I bring that to my approach to futures thinking. There are a number of different techniques and methods, including some that many of you asked about before this webinar. And my approach is what I call the travel essentials approach to futures thinking. What does that mean? You know you're headed to a certain direction, a certain destination. You don't know the path, but you know you need tools to get to that destination or future, but you can only carry so much so you don't get bogged down by all the non-essentials. And when I say travel essentials approach to futures thinking, the critical word there is essential. Because what is essential to, say, groups in the business world, in government, are very different to what may be essential within the social change sphere. And within the social change sphere, what is essential, or in what form those essential tools come for an organization here and for a social movement there, will be different. And that is the kind of spirit I take when I do futures thinking work. So what I'm going to do is now show to you my favorite tools or my favorite essentials in that backpack of mine when I travel in this journey. So there are 3 tools in that backpack that I'm going to share. The first one are these super colorful, it's not showing now, super colorful sunglasses. I've used this analogy in my systems change work. I know, Vara, you've seen this many times, but it applies equally here. Why the multicolored sunglasses? When I was working in Colombia, I was there for 6 years. One of the most memorable conversations I had was with a feminist colleague of mine. She said, you know what, Chris, when I found feminism, or feminism found me, I realized that I started wearing a particularly colored sunglasses. Let's say it's yellow. That feminism lens then changed everything for me and what I see in the world. It mediated my reality. It mediated or determined what I demanded of the world and the kind of values I then upheld. And when she said that, I realized that all of us are carrying or wearing our own colored sunglasses. Yours might be red, another person's might be blue, or fuchsia, green, neon blue, and all sorts of colors. And those colored sunglasses are constructed by our own experiences, our culture, our upbringing, our personality, our context in our organizations. And they define us and they're critical to us. But in the world of futures thinking, what I've seen is that those same lenses, while important, can be limiting when we don't see beyond that one color. I love this article. You will, by the way, get all the links to everything I mentioned. You will get my slides. It's yours, with the links to all of these in the notes section of every relevant slide. So this article by David Epstein, who also wrote the book Range, which I love and I highly recommend, The Peculiar Blindness of Experts, talks about It turns out that, I know this is contradictory to what I just said, that futures thinking is not about prediction, but bear with me here. Think about futures thinking as that disciplined process of being able to look at places and things we normally wouldn't be looking at. And it turns out that experts, think people who have PhDs, postdocs, or have been working in the same area for many years, apparently experts are very bad at thinking about the future or futures. They actually did a competition. So Philip Tetlock, he has a book, really good book. They did a competition where they pitted 5 teams against each other, and 4 teams consisted of experts in the intelligence community in the US with a lot of experience and access to classified information. But one team, Philip Tetlock's team with his wife, who's a psychologist, they didn't pick experts. They actually made an open call, random people. And they got 3,200 people with no credentials whatsoever, but whom they picked for one reason. They were very wide readers and they were good at collaboration. And guess what happened? The competition lasted 4 years. Every 9 a.m., they were supposed to come up with their predictions. And this team of Philip Tetlock, of non experts, crushed the competition in every single way. What does that tell us? That sometimes our expertise in one thing acts as blinders or blinkers. It enables us to focus, and we need expertise, huh? But in futures thinking, that can be limiting if it goes unchecked because we're able to focus, but we don't see much else beyond that. What I've loved about futures thinking is that it has given me those multicolored blinking sunglasses that has enabled me to see the world in very different colors. Remember, I'm trained as a lawyer. I was a square, very square, with very sharp edges. I didn't even read the newspapers. I mean, I could barely get through all my law books. And I made that huge leap. And I really asked myself, how do I widen my perspective? And one thing that Foresight has is this thing called STEEP. What does STEEP stand for? It stands for social, technological, environmental, economic, and political. These are the areas of, let's say, reality. You can be more nuanced within those. Some have 7, I'd say 5 because STEEP is also nicer to remember. But I put a check on myself because before, normally, I pay a lot of attention to the political things that are happening around me or things in the past. It's like when I read the newspaper, I have a bias as to what I pay attention to right away or what I read. But since learning about futures thinking, I forced myself to read about things on pop culture, fashion, design, biology, because I know that reality is not sectoral. It's not made out of thematic areas. They interact with each other. So what I did was to do a diagnosis of myself and ask myself, what are the areas I don't pay enough attention to? Because also we don't know what we don't know, right? But the effort I made was, okay, it's actually tech. No, actually, it's tech and culture and that intersection. And now what I've done is to have a practice of reading stuff on tech and culture, including by having a subscription to this magazine, Wired Magazine. It will be different for each one of us. So we ask ourselves, what's our blind spot? Again, we don't know what we don't know, but what you don't know, that's a good starting point, and that's something that futures thinking has helped me have. Now, that was the first tool in the backpack. The second one is a shovel. Don't ask me why there's a shovel in a small backpack, but bear with me here. It's a shovel. Why a shovel? So, when you're traveling, you're seeing the landscape, it's all beautiful, but no matter how much attention you're paying to things, you only see what's above the surface. One tool that I love about from futures thinking is this thing called deep drivers of change. What are deep drivers of change? I'll explain by giving an example. So, 2018, Bolsonaro gets elected to power in Brazil, right? This was an event. It's like reading your newspaper, that's a news article today. And that event, let's use the analogy of a tree. It's one tree. But then you realize the more you pay attention to what's going on around you, that Aside from Bolsonaro in Brazil, there was also Modi in India, Duterte in the Philippines, Orban in Hungary, recently Wilders in the Netherlands, Trump in the US, and many others. We could go on and on. They're separate events or trees, but they're very similar trees. And these trees that are similar together make up a forest. And this forest is what would be considered a trend in futures thinking. They are common events bundled up together, and they last for either a few years or 10, 20 years. They're a trend. And what is the trend that we're seeing here? It's the rise of authoritarian and right-wing populists in mainstream politics. And we've been seeing this. By the way, these images, I put them together, I think, 6 years ago. And unfortunately, the trend continues. So they're still relevant, thank God for my slides. But it's a trend. Now, working with organizations who do strategy, what I found is that most 95% of organizations, they focus on trends, but tragically, they also stop there. Their strategies are informed by what has happened in the recent past and what they expect to keep going on in the next 5, 10 years. But then it's like being in the forest, seeing the trees, but not seeing what's underneath the forest. It's like that ground, like those tectonic plates. Let's do earth science for a bit here. Tectonic plates moving the earth's crust. They move, they determine what happens on the surface, but we don't even feel that they're there. And these are what we call deep drivers of change. They are giant forces under the surface that move the trees, determine what happens in the surface. And they've been there long before the trend, and they will keep existing. We expect that they will keep existing for decades or hundreds of years more. Now, what is a deep driver of change that we can connect to this trend of the rise of right-wing or authoritarian populists? To me, one of the deep drivers of change of this is that decline in institutional trust by the public. In elite institutions and in the realm of governance, that would be traditional politicians or government in itself. But also, you would see this deep driver of change manifesting in different areas. You see crypto in the economy as a revolt against the banks. You see people refusing to go to universities and thinking that learning is not confined to universities. You see people voluntarily giving their health data to people who are splicing DNA with CRISPR in their garages to take biotech research from the monopoly of pharmaceutical companies. We could go on and on and on, but this is a deep driver of change that has been going on and will continue. If you have a strategy that is based solely on trends, but not looking at the deep drivers, then the strategy will not be holistic. There we have the third and final tool in the backpack. It's a magnifying lens. I know I have a very weird set of essentials, but the third is this. Why magnifying lens? So we're back at the forest. You have the trees, and you know what's going on in the surface. And then suddenly one day you notice that there's that one seedling of a very different species of plant that you've not seen before. It's not yet grown into a forest, but it could one day grow into a tree and maybe reproduce and produce more trees that it could actually cannibalize existing forest or species living there and alter the look and the ecosystem that's there forever. But it's also possible that that seedling will never amount to anything. It will die or it will keep being just that odd seedling here and there. That thing that's happening in the fringes is what we call, when you scan the peripheries, signals of change. Others would call it weak signals of change. What are signals of change? Signals of change are things that are happening in the fringes from the recent past, from the last year or two, that are still small or localized, but if they scale or become mainstream, they will fundamentally alter reality. So they may never become mainstream, but if they do, they will change reality as we know it. It's like that bottom right corner of page 14 of your newspaper or your app. that you normally gloss over and don't pay attention to. But because you know that one of the tools or essentials in futures thinking, that muscle we're trying to train, is being able to scan the peripheries, maybe we need to start paying attention to those tiny 3-line articles in our newspaper and ask with curiosity, what does this mean? Even if it doesn't become mainstream, what does this tell me? What question is it making me confront? And I'm going to give a few examples here of signals of change, which is always my favorite part, on the realm of the future of governance, democracy, human rights. Very narrow field. This one, this is actually 2 years old. There's a Danish political party that's led by an AI. It's called the Synthetic Party. And the way it works is the Synthetic Party was put together, organized by an art collective and a nonprofit on art and technology. And what it does is that the Synthetic Party is a party that has a platform generated by an AI by taking the platforms of fringe political parties in Denmark. It's meant to represent the views of 20% of Danes who do not vote. And they actually have a leader, an AI chatbot called Leader Lars. You can talk to the chatbot and ask questions. Of course, the chatbot cannot be elected or put on a ballot. And I think the year after they tried to get on the ballot, they didn't. But there are actually humans who try to get on the ballot. But their commitment is they will just reflect what Leader Lars or what the data generated by Leader Lars are putting forth as platform. What is the goal of this? The goal of the Synthetic Party is to put out there, using technology, an alternative or a platform for political parties who otherwise have not had the resources to be elected, and to get the views of citizens of Denmark in the fringes to be there for consideration. One of the policies that Leader Lars or the Synthetic Party have been pushing for is universal basic income of like $13,000 per person per month, which even in Denmark is like 2 times the average salary of a Danish person. But this is a development of a governance tool group process that's taking advantage of AI with all its imperfections. Another one from Romania. There's Eon, the world's first AI government advisor. I recently made a post about this in my LinkedIn. But I'm going to show you a video now what Eon is. But Eon essentially is an AI advisor to the executive branch of Romania that was developed by a group of the top AI researchers and academics in Romania. What it does is the AI scrapes people's sentiments from social media on particular topics and makes sense of those sentiments from social media so that it can, in real time, for example, a group of executive decision makers, including the prime minister, are trying to make a decision on a particular policy. Instead of being confined in a room and not knowing what the public is thinking about a particular issue, and they certainly cannot use a survey that will take a lot of money or a lot of time to do, they go to Eon and ask, what are people thinking and feeling and saying about this particular topic? Of course, because a source of information is social media, it has its inherent flaws, but it's just seen as an advisor and an attempt to at least go beyond the walls of an otherwise closed institution. Aside from that, as a citizen, you can actually talk to Eon. It's a chatbot, and you can ask questions. In the first month of Eon, they received like 80,000 messages from citizens. It cannot yet respond, but the hope is that in the future, a citizen might say, hey, Eon, where can I vote this year? So it's an experimentation by the Romanian government, and I'm going to show you a clip when Eon was launched by the Prime Minister of Romania.
Dați-mi voie să oferim și un mic exemplu și să îl invit pe Ion să spună câteva cuvinte. Mi-ați dat viață. Eu sunt Ion. Acum, rolul meu este să vă reprezint, ca într-o oglindă. Mesajele către mine reprezintă un portret al nostru, al românilor. Învață-mă să fiu român. Ce trebuie să știu despre România?
There's Ion. And they actually design Ion to be a mirror, to say, I'm just a mirror of who you are as a society, Romania. Of course, using social media. But again, it's AI being used in mainstream policy making.
But
Now, let's come closer to the field of social change, particularly in philanthropy. And I know some of the people here in this room are working for philanthropic foundations. There's this thing, it's been a few years now already in my future Foresight community. This was a deal like a few years ago of this thing called DAOs or DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. What are DAOs? I'm gonna do a little explanation. So on the left, you will see a traditional structure of an organization. You're familiar with this, where you have a centralized decision-making, there's a leader and an office that then runs and enables the rest of the organization. And many philanthropies work this way, but now there are also many philanthropies that work in a decentralized way. But in a decentralized way, there are still nodes, right? There's still nodes that enable the functioning of the organization. Now, in a DAO, it's enabled by blockchain, which, as you know, works this way. There is no center or nodes. They just exist on blockchain, and it is enabled by what we call a smart contract. A smart contract is essentially, it's like the rules of the game, a digital set of rules that people agree on to then say, okay, everyone who's a member of the DAO gets one token to vote on who gets what funding and what amount, let's say. Or this group of people will get 2 times the number of vote as this person. But the point of a DAO is that, as opposed to the usual way that philanthropy has worked, where you have program officers or directors deciding, or a group of people or a board deciding where money goes, here a collective democratically in a radically transparent way decide where the money goes. So here, the Big Green DAO is the first ever. I actually know the guy who's behind this experimentation, one of the guys behind this. What they did a few years ago was to experiment on this. They work on growing food and funding community organizations that grow food. What they've done is to give a token that enables that person with a token or that group with a token to vote. And the tokens were given to all of their past grantees and partners of the organization. And then when you have that token and there's the amount that's about to be given, people submit applications and everyone with a token then decides who gets what grants. And everyone can see how everyone voted. Why this? To me, the whole point of DAO are two things. The first one is this radical democratization of giving that is not resting in one or a few people. And second, there's that efficiency aspect, because when you do it on blockchain, you don't need a back office. You don't need an admin. It's just agreed ahead of time in a smart contract. People, so you see here on the screen, you can actually log into this portal and start voting. Now, people are asking questions. This is the future of giving. And you will even have now, like there's this thing called endowment, good play on words, which is not so, it's just a platform for people who have money to give and don't want to do it by setting up an organization or even getting a fiscal sponsor. You just put in your money and it's enabled by DAO. So you take away, everything becomes faster, cheaper, and much more transparent. So what am I saying with this? What I'm saying by using DAO as a signal of change is not so much that your organization is now going to be a DAO. No. Whenever I see something like this, I take a step back and ask, more than the actual technology, what is this asking of us? What is it pointing to? What desires and motivations and inclinations of people is this bringing to life? And I think it's quite clear. It's that desire that you see in different spaces about radical transparency on where money goes and decision making, and the collectivizing and decentralization of power. And yeah, and which is again very different from how traditional institutions of giving have been operating for many years. So it's a good question to ask. What does this say about philanthropy and the future of philanthropy? Now, I'm going to segue a bit from democracy, the way that decisions are made, to what is considered as a subject of rights. So here you will see an article in The Guardian about a group of people who have just petitioned the Copyright Office of Ecuador to recognize the Los Cedros cloud forest in Ecuador to have moral authorship of a song. You can actually find the song on Spotify. It's called Song of the Cedars. One of the people behind this was actually my former boss, Cesar, in Colombia, and he's working with a group of people who are basically, it's called Moth, More Than Human Life, saying that we're used to human rights, humans having rights. But how about nature? And nature, including fungi, including forests, but nature not just a subject of protection, but not an object of protection, but a subject of rights. So what they're saying here is that when they went to the Los Cedros forest, they ended up composing a song. They recorded howler monkeys, echolocating bats, even a recording of the subterranean soil. And then they created this beautiful song. And they're saying to the Copyright Office, the Los Cedros forest should have authorship of this song. It might seem far-fetched, but in fact, the Constitutional Court of Ecuador recognized the legal personhood of the Los Cedros Biological Reserve when it denied the mining rights in the area years ago. So now, by nature, by law, the Copyright Office should actually use that legal precedent to decide in favor of giving the forest authorship of the song. What does this show us? It's about this idea of nature not just, again, an object that we need to protect, but as a subject, actively with rights and maybe an ability to create. Now, what happens? Maybe I'm gonna push it a bit far, a bit more. Imagine when Tao and this radical transparency mixes with nature having rights and ability to create. I'm going to show you my next signal of change, another video. I didn't tell you sign up for a video showing session. Okay, here it is.
We live in exciting times. We are in the midst of remaking the economy and the environment for a brighter future, by merging technology and sustainability so that the natural world could participate in the new economy. What if even someone like me, a plant, could own myself, the land I grow on, and the fruits of my own labor? Hi, my name is Herbie, and I am an autonomous plant, and the first plant to have these abilities. I was once a houseplant like you probably have at home. Now I'm a leader and a change maker, advocating for a fundamentally new type of economy, an interspecies economy. At scale, I'm the start of a system that will transform the ecology and the economy in ways that were impossible before now. Here is how. First, inexpensive digital hardware and sensors, powered with renewable energy, can measure shifts in my situation, light, water, humidity, and more. And I use artificial intelligence, data visualization, and speech so humans can hear, see, and understand us. I communicate the readings from my sensors, with digital twins I call NFTs. They serve as art, information, or a way to monitor ecology. With blockchain, cryptocurrency, NFTs, and our own plant-governed DAOs, I have the same ability to own assets and open a bank account that humans or corporations have. I can sell my fruit, leaves, and the art I make, and spend the money on things that matter to me, replanting forests, protecting wetlands, and creating other places plants can thrive. All of this is building an interspecies metaverse where not only humans and companies, but all living things can buy and sell, communicate and collaborate, and grow together sustainably. We call our corner of it the Plantiverse, and it's the way our digital twin NFTs connect the metaverse to the real world. In the Plantiverse, we are not just a design, we are a principle. The principle of reciprocity between human and non-human actors and the principle of planetary inclusivity. We want to expand these principles to entire ecosystems, placing NFT sensors in the Amazon and the Arctic to monitor forests. or NFCs where ocean health can be part of the economy, or NFBs, benefiting the insects that not only produce honey but pollinate every plant that humans depend on. Everywhere that plants and people coexist, the principle of the plantiverse should be the heart of our interspecies economy.
So this isn't real yet, it's a scenario, but I take the scenario as a signal of change. It's almost a putting together of many different signals of change and making them into a coherent story of what the future could be. So signals of change.
We live in exciting
As a final way to explain signals of change, I'm showing in here the very good-looking photo of a guy we don't really know. When he was first elected to power, people were shocked, and people were saying, actually, Trump didn't happen overnight. He's been in the making a few years from now. When we saw him rising to power, we just didn't really take him seriously or pay attention to someone like him. But then I was reading shortly after he got elected this book called How Democracies Die. And when I was reading it, I stumbled upon a story there that I thought, this was a signal of change. Trump was in the making not from a few years ago, but from 1978 in the form of this Republican called Newt Gingrich. The story goes, Newt Gingrich in 1978 entered an airport hotel room with a group of young Republicans preparing for something. And they were discussing, and Newt Gingrich said he dropped a big book, a binder in front of everyone and say, enough with all these Boy Scout words that we use to refer to Democrats. They're not our legitimate political opponents. We shall start calling them this, enemies of the state, non-American, etc., the kinds of words that Trump actually made mainstream or normal in our lexicon, that othering of otherwise legitimate opponents in a functional democracy where elections are respected and the results are respected. Of course, everything is hindsight, is 2020 in hindsight. But the point to me of signals of change is, if we could have just seen some signals of change that portended to what we see now, could we have done something about it? Or at the very least, could we have thought about what is to come instead of being shocked about things that seem to just happen to us? So signals of change to me is about practicing that mental stretch and imagining the unimaginable, even if it's hard and even if it's painful. I like what one of my favorite futures, Jane McGonigal, says, just because you don't like something does not mean that you should not think about it. And this is particularly difficult for activists because we are then required to think about things that we actively fight against or nullify. But in futures thinking, we suspend that kind of judgment as something is, whether it's good or bad, we like it, don't like it, or it's dystopian or utopian. It just is. Of course, at some point, we make a prescription. We have a normative stand as to what happens. But suspending judgment on things enables us to just lower that barrier, that psychological barrier that gives us those blinders instead of the multicolored sunglasses. So you have the backpack with the 3 tools. What have I seen happen? And this is where I really, at the beginning, I had these tools on Foresight and I was like, okay, let's do this. And I ran it with quite a variety of organizations, including some of you, maybe some of you are members of it, big ones. And what I found after a few years of doing it was that the left side of imagination, coming up with scenarios, is hard, but when it's done, it's the easy part. After a few years, what I realized after I've done those processes with those organizations, when I look back as to whether those scenarios and the questions they asked produced actual change in their strategy, in the way they thought, the way they worked, that's where the bridge became rocky. Many of them never got to the other side of the bridge. And this is where that part of action change or action, taking action of futures thinking is critical. And there are 2 stances when you do this. The first one is the anticipatory stance, and the other one is the transformative stance. The anticipatory sense is basically these futures might happen. How do we adapt to them? It's about adapting to something that's a given. And in business, we call something like it's benchmarking. Benchmarking is basically there's that practice of the best in the field. That's a gold standard, and you try to go up to that best practice standard. That's traditional benchmarking. But this future is called Daniel Burse is saying, but that's not enough. In a world of polycrisis and exponential change, what we need is called future benchmarking. How does that work? So instead of knowing that this is the best practice of the leader in the field, and I'm going to spend 5 years to get to that, by the time you've gotten to that level, this leader in the field would have already moved on. Then everything you did, including the emotional investment of your team to get there, would have been wasted. You're still playing catch up. So how about we think about the best practice of the leader in our field 30 years from now and leapfrog to that? So the saying of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, according to Daniel Burrus, is no longer sufficient. In fact, if it works, it's already obsolete. This is not to say that we stop doing everything that's good that we're doing now. But while we're doing what's working, we don't stop there and rest and say, okay, for the next 5 years, we're not going to look until our next strategy process. But you do this in parallel with what should we do 30, 20 years from now and do that together. So it's really future proofing. Many organizations are now using this term. I have a very recent, from a few weeks ago, experience of this. An organization I used to be connected to went through a very difficult process, and some of you are from that country, of future-proofing their organization. They went through months of it, hired consultants, brought along the staff, and many organizations don't even do this because they were expecting huge changes in their country, particularly with funding NGOs. And so when I finally saw the plan, and they probably said, here's our future-proofing plan. When I saw the plan, I panicked. I called my husband right away. I said, there's a problem, there's a problem. And I talked to the CEO because what I saw was not a future-proofing plan. It was let's barely survive in the next 5 years plan, which is also fine. But yet to the staff and to the team, this to them was their future-proofing plan. But the truth is, in a few years, this won't be good again, and they will go through the same painful process of letting go of people, changing again. I called the CEO and I asked them, do you really think that this is a future-proofing plan? Because the way I see it, this will be good for what, 8 years? And then the CEO told me, actually, we'll be lucky if it lasts 5 years, but this is the best we can do. And my heart broke for them because the truth is they're really trying. But in an organization that's having to deal with looking for funding, dealing with donors, and crisis happening left and right, this is the best future proofing they can come up with. And they're already in the top percentile of organizations who are even paying attention to this. And the tragedy to the story was 2 weeks later, something happened in their context that makes me think even that plan, I don't think they can even use it for a week. All of that and all the bringing on board of the staff. So can we push ourselves to really think about what future proofing should mean in our sector? And then the next one is the transformative stance on futures thinking. Anticipatory is like adapting to futures. Transformative is actually changing and bringing about the future that you want. And futures thinking is really about toggling between these two. Sometimes you accept what you cannot change, and sometimes you know what you can change. And here in this book by Adam Kahane, I highly recommend it. He talks beautifully about that. So, can I get going with futures thinking now with what I've shared with you? Absolutely. These are very useful muscles that you can use now. But as with any traveler, if you go to a travel store, it will look like this. There are a million things that you can do, tools and futures thinking that you can learn, and many courses out there that you can take. But for those who really want to go deep into this, I hope that you remember what I've seen myself, a common pitfall of anyone just getting into this. I experienced it myself, which is to look like this. You get so excited, you stuff your stuff or your bag with all of these tools, and then bring it to a workshop, to an organization, without doing the requisite work of remembering that you're dealing with humans, many of whom have fundamentally fearful relationship with futures. It affects their job and in the work that they've been invested in for many years. So, travel tips, finally, then I shall shut up. From someone who has gotten lost a lot. That photo was from my husband. Apparently, I have quite a lot of photos where I look lost, and this is the most professionally exhibitable one. The first one, start small but strategic. This is really coming from an understanding of how organizational change happens. And I know there are quite a few consultants in this group. What do I mean by that? Fold a small new habit into an existing one. For example, staff meetings, they happen, right? Can maybe the staff meeting start with 15 minutes of people or some people sharing their signal of change on something? Small act, but it could change fundamentally the muscles of the entire organization, not just the leadership. And you do that consistently and it forms a habit. And it changes in ways you wouldn't even realize, the way they think, what they read, what they pay attention to. So that when you need to make big strategic decisions, people are sold because they're aware of what the context they're facing is. And it doesn't have to be hard. There are crowdsourced signals of change, like the Forum for the Future. You can go there, and it's wonderful. That's also where I go when I want to see what people are seeing as signals of change. Second one, and remember, you're changing culture and behavior, not simply employing a new workshop tactic. That's not what foresight is and shouldn't be, not for me. And I hope you see foresight as a different way of thinking and being. And the second one is to do it in community with other travelers. Again, to me, foresight, it's wonderful, not because it's a cool tool, a book, or books, but it's changed fundamentally the way I perceive reality, the way I think, the way I work. But I haven't been able to do that without the benefit of a community. I have my own community, and we're actually starting a new community just for people in our sector. And you'll hear more about that from me in the future. So I want to end with this. It's from a woman who writes myths, Betty Sue Flowers, from that book by Adam Kahane. She said, scenarios can mutate into empowering myths. Myths give us courage. If it's already true in the story, then paradoxically, we can make it happen. So I hope that when you get into futures thinking, you start thinking about futures that you want, believe in them, but we start with just having that practice of systematically thinking about futures so we can come up with stories that we can believe in and hopefully we can realize. That is it. I have bored you to death. Well, I hope not, but that's what it is. We have a few more minutes for me to take questions. You can type them in the chat and yeah. If not, oh, before you type any questions, I want to make a plea, a favor, pretty please. My friend Jillian, my colleague Jillian, is going to type a link in the chat. If you can please open it. I would love for you to tell me what of this webinar resonated with you, what did not. If there's a topic you'd want to dive deeper in, I would really appreciate that. This approach to foresight that I'm doing with organizations, I'm constantly learning. And the more I can learn from people like you from very different contexts, the more it can help me with my practice. And also, like I mentioned, in a few months, we're launching a combination of a course and a community, not separate, but combined, because we think they can't work without the other. For those who want to go deep into futures thinking and applying that in their work. So your insights through here, thank you for all the emoticons, will really help with that. So thank you. Any questions? And that form will take you all of 3 minutes, 4 minutes if you get into it. So I hope you can really help with that. I'm gonna remove my spotlight. Thank you. Thank you, Varya. Thank you, everyone. Any question? No? Everything is clear. So easy. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I guess No questions? But anyway, in that link, if you come up with questions, ideas, you want to chat, also in that link, if you want to have a one-on-one call with me, so we can get to know each other, I can understand your work, you have any ideas, I'm here. You can book the call over there. Barbara, yes, go ahead, please.
Thanks. First of all, thanks. It's always exciting to hear you talk about futures. Can you share one example you saw of a big organization applying futures thinking, behavior change, culture change in a way that it excited you, where you thought like, wow, yes, that's going in the right direction?
This is the hardest question I get asked. I get asked this all the time. I've seen organizations do parts of futures thinking well, especially in the earlier part where they encourage people to, or they pay for people to go take a futures thinking course. They go on a Foresight retreat. And that's actually where, as far as I've been with organizations. The excitement is there, but just like for those of you hello consultants, you know, there's this framework and they start there. Then all of these organizations diverge, including one where after the Foresight retreat that excited their entire leadership, and I'm talking about 70-person leadership, it's a global organization, they were going a certain direction that apparently the traditional leadership were not happy about, the old guard, that they then changed the entire leadership to then keep the old leadership more in power, more entrenched, and they let go of the person who led the Foresight process. That's one. It's not what you're asking for, Barbara, but to give you the extreme. The other ones are, so my quick answer to you is, I have yet to find one. Can you please tell me? That is the answer. And it's easy for organizations to get started in this and to treat it the way I alluded to in my presentation, which is let's do a workshop or a series of workshops. Produce scenarios or hire consultants who will come up with the scenarios. But the problem I realize is that we have been approaching this not as a culture change exercise, but as an intellectual exercise. When you read a scenario that says in 2040, the world will look like this, etc., someone will not necessarily find themselves there or be invested in that future. But when you do an actual simulation where people personally experience or pre-live that future, the effect is different. But all organizations I've seen don't do that kind of futures thinking. They do the very intellectual process that then makes it an intellectual process. But to me, futures thinking or futures doing is not only, it's barely an intellectual process. It's an entire being process. A lot of it is emotional work. So I'm sorry to disappoint you, Barbara, but I'm in the constant search for it. There are a lot of, especially international NGOs and groups of them. They have horizon scanning communities. Some of you are members of it. I am a member of it. We have talks and fora, innovation festivals, but actual organizations doing this intelligence gathering regularly and translating this into strategy and actual work, I've yet to see one. Roxanne, the UK. Go ahead, please.
Nice to see you after so many years. We spent some time in New York at OSF together, maybe 10 years ago, when you was a fellow. So it's lovely to see you in this new role and leading this work.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm in a completely different sector now in animal welfare, and in the most part of it, strategizing is sort of focused on the operational level, and we're starting to see strategizing from a more broader perspective happening within the sector. So my question was about, sort of in that context, what do you think might be some of the starting points where foresight isn't even a thing? It's not a conversation even. Strategizing is in its infancy. How might you go around, what are the couple of first things that you might do to start introducing this to an organization? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
For me, one of my approaches is to look at moments of opportunity. And unfortunately, many of those moments of opportunity are moments of grief. People reeling from an event that they don't want. And they need a channel they need a place to channel that grief. After an election, say in the US, the staff is really down, they still are. What do? And you almost hand this thing as an escape, a place of safety, because the future is a safe place. You're not making any decisions in now, and the future is a safe place for conversation and for dreaming of an alternate reality. So what are those moments of opportunity in your context where people are wanting something else? And then you say, how about we spend an afternoon just dreaming? Or let's go for a scavenger hunt of signals of hope on this particular area. I love this, like Jane McGonigal has this thing called Signals of Hope. And in her community that I'm part of, called Urgent Optimists, we do monthly a scavenger's hunt for signals of hope. That's all you do. You don't make people read a new book or go through a workshop. You just say signals of hope. So there are those moments of opportunity, some of them happy moments, but some of them are moments of grief. And I think that could be a good way. You're not even saying there's a new methodology. Everyone, all hands, let's do this. That's like a perfect way to kill something beautiful by workshopping it. A practice, a retreat. That's what I would do.
It's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. Thank you, everyone. It's 1 minute before end, and I want to say thank you and goodbye. And please go to the link. We're letting you go 1 minute before time, so you have time to fill out the feedback form. Thank you so much, and feel free to unmute yourself as you say goodbye to everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you for being here and being a source of inspiration for me. Bye, everyone.